Hi everyone, welcome back to the channel. So in today's video, we're going to see stories of people who met horrible and tragic fates. Hearing these stories, it almost seems like the whole universe conspired to put these unlucky people in the wrong place at the exact wrong time. Sometimes it was just pure bad luck. Other times, it happened because they pushed things too far and took risks they shouldn't have. All of these stories are tragic, terrifying, and real, and more often than not, end fatally. So let's begin with the first story, Gollum Cave Incident. Late at night on August 18, 2005, a group of young people went into an old cave on Y Mountain in Utah. The cave had a short tunnel filled with water. The tunnel was only about 4.5 meters long, and the group thought it would be easy to swim through. But sadly, 4 of them never made it out alive. One of the people was Jennifer Lynn Galbraith, a 21-year-old student at Utah Valley State College. She had just finished her first year. Jennifer loved adventure and trying new things. She also liked photography, music, and even did some modeling. She met 24-year-old John Blake Donor, who was the lead singer of a rock band called Parallax. John also liked art and was a student too. Jennifer and John quickly became close. She even joined his band. Through the band, they made more friends: Kieran Scott McDonald, 28, Ariel Singer, 18, and Joseph Ferguson, 26. They all liked music and exploring new places. Jennifer had even explored some caves earlier that year, though she had fainted in one and got lost in another. On August 17th, the band played a show at a cafe. After the show, they were excited because their first album was finally finished. They wanted to celebrate. While eating dinner, Jennifer told the group about a cave she had been to before. It was an old mine on Y Mountain. The mine was not very big. The entrance was only about 1.2 meters tall. There was water on the ground, and the group had to crouch to go inside. Deeper in the cave was a 15-foot tunnel full of water. On the other side of that tunnel was a small room where you could come up for air. That room was called Gollum Cave. But the tunnel was very narrow. Only one person could go through at a time. The water was freezing cold, dirty, and full of things floating in it. Even with lights on their heads, it was hard to see. If someone kicked up the dirt on the bottom, the water would turn cloudy, and it would be hard to find the way back. To help find the way, someone had tied a rope through the tunnel. The rope was the only guide in the dark water. Jennifer remembered how cold it was last time, and how she had almost passed out. Even though it was risky, the group decided to go. They joked and called it the Cave of Death. Sadly, that name would become true. At 3 a.m. on August 18th, the 5 friends reached the cave. After looking around for about an hour, they got ready to go inside. Just before entering, Joseph began to feel nervous. His gut told him not to go in. The others tried to convince him, but he chose to stay outside. That choice saved his life. Jennifer and the others put on headlamps and entered the cave. They walked through the shallow water until they reached the narrow water tunnel. One by one, they started swimming through it. Jennifer went first. She held the rope and dove into the dark, cold water. The others followed her, one at a time. They reached the other side and entered Gollum Cave. But the water there was chest deep and freezing, and they didn't have wetsuits. Some were even wearing sandals and shorts. The air in the cave was also bad. There was very little space above the water to breathe. The air was full of carbon dioxide, and not much oxygen was left. Old candles and other visitors had made the air even worse over time. Breathing in the cave was now dangerous. Realizing this, the group panicked. 4 of them decided to leave right away, but only one person could go through the tunnel at a time. They had to wait for their turn, which took several minutes each. But panic made them rush. Jennifer went first again. She was struggling because the water was cold and she couldn't breathe well. She lost her grip on the rope and passed out in the tunnel, blocking it. Ariel thought Jennifer had made it through, so she swam in right after her. But she ran into Jennifer's body and got stuck too. There was no room to turn around. She also passed out. Next, John went in, but with 2 bodies in the tunnel, there was no space. He also couldn't get through and drowned. Then Scott McDonald followed and met the same fate. Back outside, Joseph was still waiting. After about 45 minutes, he got worried and went into the cave to look. He reached the place where they should have come out, but saw nothing. He knew something was wrong and called for help. If he had gone in, he might have died too. Rescue teams came about 2 hours later. They tried pumping oxygen into the cave, but no one answered. Then they started pumping the water out. That took 4 more hours. When the water was low, rescuers went in with full safety gear. Sadly, they found the 4 missing friends drowned. Their bodies were all facing the same way, showing they had died trying to get out. The tunnel was too small, and they had blocked it without meaning to. Later that day, workers closed off the cave forever with rocks and cement. A sign with their names was placed at the site to remember them. These young people were full of life, chasing adventure. But one wrong decision in a dangerous place took everything away. Hisashi Ouchi. In 1999, Hisashi's life seemed ordinary. He was married, a proud father of a young son, and worked as a technician at the JCO Tokaimura power plant in Japan. JCO, the company operating the plant, had for years been skirting official safety regulations in an effort to boost productivity. They developed an unofficial protocol known as the Shadow Guide, which outlined shortcuts for handling radioactive materials. These shortcuts were dangerous and blatantly violated nuclear safety standards. On September 30th, 1999, Hisashi and his colleagues were tasked with preparing fuel for the Joyo fast reactor. Using the methods from the Shadow Guide, they bypassed safety procedures and used equipment not designed to handle the large quantities of radioactive material involved. Hisashi's role was to hold a funnel over a large steel containment tank while a colleague poured in a uranium solution. The tank, inadequate for this purpose, was essentially a ticking time bomb. As Hisashi leaned over it, a catastrophic event occurred, a nuclear criticality accident. A loud bang echoed through the room, followed by a vivid blue flash, Cherenkov radiation, a terrifying sign of an uncontrolled nuclear reaction. Hisashi, being closest to the tank, absorbed the most radiation, a staggering 17 sieverts. To put that in perspective, just 8 sieverts is considered lethal. When rescuers arrived, they found Hisashi vomiting uncontrollably, dizzy, and disoriented. Despite these symptoms, he had no visible wounds or burns. He was immediately airlifted to a hospital where doctors were initially puzzled by his stable appearance. Aside from slight redness on his right arm, the one closest to the tank, he seemed fine. He was even able to joke with the hospital staff about going home soon. But Hisashi was already a dead man walking. He had entered what is called the walking ghost phase. The radiation had destroyed his chromosomes, the genetic blueprints needed for cells to repair and reproduce. While his body appeared functional on the outside, it was silently dying from within. His cells could no longer regenerate. Within weeks, Hisashi's condition deteriorated rapidly. His intestines began to hemorrhage. His skin started sloughing off. Skin grafts failed to adhere to his body, forcing the medical staff to wrap him in gauze like a mummy to contain his bodily fluids. By November, nearly 2 months after the accident, his pain had become unbearable. He was placed in a medically induced coma. Even in this state, Hisashi's body resisted death. His heart stopped 3 times, and each time the medical team revived him, driven by the hope of learning more about radiation exposure to prevent future tragedies. But their efforts came at a terrible human cost. When Hisashi briefly regained consciousness, he begged the doctors to let him die, saying, "I am not a guinea pig." Eventually, a do not resuscitate order was put in place, finally granting him some peace. After 83 harrowing days of unimaginable suffering, Hisashi passed away. The image most associated with his story is haunting. It shows him during the walking ghost phase, and more graphic photographs of his later condition are rarely or never shared. On the night of Friday, December 13, 2002, 47-year-old Keith Masters and his girlfriend were leaving their apartment. As they walked down the hallway, they ran into their friend, Kyle McGarity. Kyle, who was 25 years old, had just finished his shift as a bartender and was ready to enjoy the weekend and get into the holiday spirit. Even though Keith was much older than Kyle, the two had become close friends. They lived in the same building and often hung out together. So when Keith saw Kyle that night, he invited him to join them for drinks. Kyle agreed, and the three of them went to a bar just down the street in Lower Manhattan. At the bar, they had a great time and drank a lot. But on the way back, things took a dark turn. Keith started to believe that Kyle was flirting with his girlfriend. Whether Kyle actually was or not, no one knows for sure. But Keith, who was drunk and angry, became very upset. He confronted Kyle and accused him of making a move on his girlfriend. Keith was older, stronger, and much bigger than Kyle. Witnesses said it wasn't a fair fight at all. Keith threw Kyle around like a rag doll, slamming him into the ground over and over. Kyle begged him to stop and even said his leg was about to break, but Keith didn't listen. Just a few feet away from the fight, there was an open manhole in the street. A private utility company had been working on a problem with the steam pipes underground. The manhole led to a deep, 15-foot hole that was filled with scalding hot water and steam. Workers had placed a temporary plastic cover over it earlier, but somehow it wasn't there anymore. In a moment of rage, Keith grabbed Kyle and dragged him toward the open manhole. Without thinking twice, he threw Kyle inside. The water and steam inside the manhole were extremely hot, about 572 degrees Fahrenheit. It was like being thrown into boiling soup. Kyle was in terrible pain and started screaming for help. His screams were so loud that people nearby heard him and called the police. It was around 4 a.m. when the first officer arrived. But the steam was so hot, the officer couldn't even stand near the manhole, let alone help Kyle. Firefighters were called in next. They came wearing full protective gear, but even they struggled with the heat. They saw Kyle waist deep in the boiling water. He had his hands up, trying to get someone to help him. The firefighters threw him a rope, hoping he could tie it around himself so they could pull him out. But by then, Kyle's body was starting to shut down from the heat. He couldn't grab the rope. His muscles had started to stop working. The police asked the utility company to shut off the steam line, but it would take hours for the steam to cool down. There was nothing anyone could do. Kyle stayed trapped in the hole for almost 4 hours. His cries eventually stopped, and he died in that manhole. When they finally pulled out his body, the medical examiner described it as if Kyle had been steamed like a lobster. Experts explain that steam burns, unlike fire, don't always destroy nerve endings. This meant Kyle felt the pain the whole time until he passed out. Because of the extreme temperature, the pain would have been even worse than being in boiling water. Keith Masters was arrested and charged with second-degree murder, but for reasons that were never shared with the public, those charges were later dropped. Kyle's family also tried to sue the utility company for leaving the manhole open. The company claimed they had properly closed the manhole, though the cover was clearly missing that night. In the end, Kyle's death was a terrible and painful tragedy that could have been avoided. Akbar Salubiro. In March 2017, a shocking and tragic incident unfolded on the Indonesian island of Sulawesi. A 25-year-old man named Akbar Salubiro, who lived in a small village, made his living harvesting palm fruit from tall trees using a long pole with a hook at the end. Known for his hard work and dedication, Akbar often spent long hours in the forest. On March 25th, Akbar decided to stay out later than usual. Many of his family members were away, and he had no pressing reason to return home early. As night fell, he continued working alone, which was a departure from his typical routine of harvesting alongside other villagers. Unbeknownst to him, this decision would have devastating consequences. Indonesia is home to a diverse range of wildlife, including massive reticulated pythons that can grow up to 20 feet or more. These apex predators are known for their stealth, strength, and ability to ambush prey with precision. That evening, under the cover of the dense forest, one such python silently stalked. The enormous snake struck with terrifying speed and accuracy, sinking its sharp teeth into Akbar and wrapping its powerful coils around him. Pythons use their muscular bodies to constrict prey, cutting off blood flow and oxygen until their victim succumbs. Alone and with no one nearby to help, Akbar stood no chance. Once he was lifeless, the python began the process of swallowing him whole. Back at home, Akbar's absence initially went unnoticed. His family assumed he was working late and went to bed unaware of the horror that had unfolded. By morning, When Akbar was still missing, his family grew concerned. When his co-workers arrived at the forest to resume their work, they too noticed his absence and began asking around. As no one had seen him, a search effort was organized. The search party concentrated on the forest where Akbar had last been seen. Hours later, they found unsettling signs of his presence. One of his boots and his fruit harvesting pole were lying abandoned nearby. A distinctive large trail through the underbrush raised alarm among the villagers. Those familiar with the local wildlife immediately recognized it as the path of a massive python. Following the trail, the searchers soon came upon a giant, misshapen python weighing nearly 300 pounds. The snake's bloated midsection left no doubt about what or who it had consumed. Acting quickly, the group captured and killed the python to confirm their worst fears. Upon cutting it open, they discovered Akbar's body still intact but lifeless inside the snake's stomach. Images of the gruesome discovery quickly spread across the internet, drawing worldwide attention to the incident. Larry Murillo Moncada. On November 27, 2009, the day after Thanksgiving, a happy family dinner turned into a nightmare in Council Bluffs, Iowa. A young man named Larry Murillo Moncada got into a serious argument with his parents at the dinner table. He was only 25 years old at the time. The argument became very heated, and in anger, Larry stormed out of the house. It was snowing heavily that night, and Larry left without shoes, a coat, or his phone and car keys. He was only wearing a hoodie and light pants, not enough to keep warm in the freezing cold. Even though his parents were very worried, they didn't panic right away. Larry had done this kind of thing before, leaving the house after an argument and coming back a few hours later. But this time he didn't come back. His father and a family friend went out to look for him that night but didn't find anything. Soon after, the family contacted the police. A full search began. Days passed, then weeks, and then months, but Larry was nowhere to be found. There were no clues, no sightings, and no idea what had happened. It was as if he had vanished. Larry's parents were heartbroken. As time went on, hope slowly faded. The case went cold, and for 10 long years, no one knew what had happened to Larry, until a shocking discovery was made less than a mile from his house. Larry's story started long before that night. He had moved to the U.S. from Honduras with his family when he was young, but he had a hard time adjusting to life in a new country. As he grew older, he struggled more and more with mental health issues. By the time he was 25, Larry was dealing with depression and other serious problems. He was on medication, but it didn't always help. Sometimes, the medicine made him feel worse, and it gave him side effects that were hard to deal with. Larry also had strange experiences. He told people he heard voices and believed someone was chasing him. Life was very difficult for him, but he found some peace working at a local supermarket. Being at work made him feel calm, and he spent more time there than at home. On the day he disappeared, Larry had worked a shift at the store and came home feeling upset. His parents tried to talk to him over dinner, but things quickly turned into an argument. Angry and overwhelmed, Larry left the house in the snowstorm, without anything to keep him safe or warm. 10 years later, workers were cleaning out the old supermarket where Larry had worked. It had been closed for 3 years, and now a crew was removing shelves and freezers. As they moved one of the tall freezers, they made a terrible discovery: a human body. The body was badly decayed and stuck in a small space behind the freezer. At first, no one knew who it was. It had been there so long that the body had become mummified. The workers called the police, and soon the investigation began. The clothes on the body matched what Larry had been wearing the night he disappeared. A DNA test later confirmed that the body was, in fact, Larry. Everyone was shocked. How did Larry end up behind a freezer in the very store where he worked? Police looked into the situation and came up with a likely answer. On the night he left his house, Larry probably returned to the supermarket, even though he wasn't working. Since he wasn't on the clock, no one knew he was there. Larry climbed on top of the large refrigerators in the back room, a place employees often sat during breaks. But something went wrong. He slipped and fell into a narrow gap between the back of the freezer and the wall. Once he was stuck, he couldn't get out. He must have screamed and cried for help, but no one heard him. The freezers were loud, and the area was always noisy, so his cries were drowned out. Trapped and alone, Larry eventually died from dehydration and lack of air. His body stayed hidden behind the freezer for years. Because the store already had strong smells from the food and machines, no one noticed anything unusual. Customers sometimes said the store smelled bad, but no one thought to look behind the freezer. Larry's body remained there, unseen, for 7 years, while the store stayed open, and another 3 years after it closed. In the end, Larry had never gone far. He had been less than a mile from home the whole time. The big game. On November 29, 1900, the California Golden Bears and the Stanford Cardinals were set to face off in what was known as the big game. Across the street from the game's venue, the San Francisco and Pacific Glassworks Company had just opened a new factory. Despite its newness, only one furnace was operational, filled with 14 tons of molten glass, heated to a scorching 1600 degrees Celsius. The big game attracted a large crowd, including many who couldn't afford, or didn't want, to pay the admission fee of $1, a significant sum equivalent to about $40 today. Desperate to watch the game, hundreds of people climbed onto the roof of the new glass factory, seeking a better vantage point. Factory workers warned the police about the danger, as the roof's ventilator could not support the weight of so many people, but their warnings were ignored. Just 20 minutes after the game started, the roof collapsed. Around 100 people fell 4 stories to the factory floor, some dying instantly. Another 60 to 100 people fell onto the furnace, where the surface temperature of 260 degrees Celsius caused unimaginable suffering. Some even fell through pipes, leading to hot oil spraying and igniting, burning people alive. In total, 23 lives were lost, most of them young males. Banzai pipeline slide disaster. It was June 2, 1997, at exactly 3 p.m. A lifeguard at Waterworld USA in Concord, California, was sitting high in her tower. Suddenly, she saw something very wrong. She blew her whistle again and again and shouted as loud as she could. She was trying to warn a group of students who were not following the rules. Below her, a big crowd had gathered around a ride called the Banzai Pipeline. It was a huge water slide with twists and turns. It was one of the most exciting rides in the park. At the top of the slide, over 30 students had gathered. They were happy, laughing and shouting, not thinking about safety. One after another, they threw themselves down the wet slide without waiting for space between them, like the rules said. The lifeguard waved her arms and kept yelling, but no one listened. In just a few moments, a fun day would turn into something very sad. One of the students there was 18-year-old Quimby. She was a smart and kind girl. She went to Napa High School and always got good grades. She helped others at school and wanted to study psychology at California State University in the fall. This trip was supposed to be a fun end to her last year in high school. At her school, the senior trip was a special tradition. Every year, the seniors would take one last fun trip together. This year, they chose Waterworld USA. The students were very excited. They had heard a story from the class before them. That group had all gone down a slide at the same time, holding hands. It sounded risky, but fun. Some students wanted to do the same thing, but even bigger. They wanted to beat that story. When they arrived at the park, they talked about it more. Soon, many students were ready to try the same stunt. On the morning of June 2nd, the students arrived full of energy. After a quick safety talk, they spread out through the park, laughing, running, and enjoying the rides. They tried everything: the wave pool, the lazy river, the tall slides. They were having a great time. By the afternoon, they wanted one last thrill. That's when they decided to do the big group ride down the Banzai pipeline. The slide was very tall, about 40 feet high. It was long and twisted with a steep drop. You could see the whole park from the top. It was scary and exciting. More than 30 students went up the stairs to the top. At first, they went down one by one. But soon, they started going faster, closer together. They were supposed to wait between each person. The rules were clear, but they didn't listen. Their plan was to go down together, all at once. They didn't think about how dangerous that could be. The slide started to get full. More and more students were sliding without stopping. Soon, 33 students were jammed inside the slide. It was too crowded. Quimby was in the middle of it. The lifeguard saw the danger and tried to stop them. She shouted, waved her arms, and blew her whistle over and over. But it was too late. The students didn't stop. The last student got stuck just 1 meter from the top. Then the worst thing happened. The slide had too much weight, 4 times more than it was made to hold. Even though it was strong, it couldn't handle so many people. Right in front of the crowd, the slide started to bend. The students inside started screaming. They were trapped with nowhere to go. Some tried to climb back up, but it was too crowded. Within seconds, the middle part of the slide broke. It cracked and fell from about 37 feet high. The students began to fall straight down onto the hard ground. Some hit the concrete, others landed on top of each other. People nearby screamed and rushed to help. The lifeguard and other workers ran to the scene. One lifeguard named Franks found Quimby. She was badly hurt. Her chest was crushed and her head was bleeding. At first, she was still awake. Franks stayed with her and tried to keep her awake, but she passed out in the ambulance and died about 45 minutes later. The other students were taken to hospitals. Some were in serious condition. They stayed in the hospital for weeks. After the accident, the park closed. The families of the students, including Quimby's, sued the park and the school. They said the slide wasn't safe and the staff didn't do enough. They also said the school should have stopped the students from trying the stunt. But a few days later, a report said the slide was built correctly and had passed all safety checks. Many students admitted the lifeguard had warned them, but they didn't listen because they were too excited. Even though the park wasn't blamed, the company agreed to pay around $4 million. Quimby's family received $1.7 million. A week later, the school held a memorial for Quimby. About 800 students came to say goodbye. José Valenzuela. The story of José Valenzuela is told through the final photo taken just before a tragic accident. José, a dedicated contractor, was repairing a damaged sewer line near the intersection of Voorhees and 3rd Streets in Holdenville, Oklahoma, on April 10, 2023. Valenzuela, who moved to Oklahoma in 1997 and had been living in Holdenville for 15 years, worked for the Dawson-Dozit Plumbing Company. On that fateful day, as he and other contractors were replacing a broken sewer line, the trench in which they were working suddenly collapsed, burying Valenzuela under 12 feet of dirt and debris. Despite emergency crews' efforts, including specialized trench and excavation rescue teams from nearby fire departments, the complexity of the situation, involving active gas pipelines and water mains, hindered their ability to safely reach him. For 9 agonizing hours, the teams worked to free him. But as Chief Kyle Lenning of the Holdenville Police Department noted, the operation eventually shifted from a rescue to a recovery effort. Valenzuela's body was finally recovered at 11:20 p.m. John Jones. John Jones, a 26-year-old medical student, came from a family of avid spelunkers, people passionate about exploring underground caves. During the Thanksgiving holiday, John was back in Utah with his family, eager to reconnect. They decided to engage in an activity they loved. This time, their destination was Nutty Putty Cave, a well-known but treacherous cave system in the area. For John and his family, it was their first visit to this particular cave. On the evening of November 24, 2009, around 8 p.m., John, his 23-year-old younger brother Josh, and 9 other friends and family members entered the cave together. They explored a section known as the Big Slide, which was relatively easy to navigate. However, feeling confident in his abilities despite years away from spelunking, John decided to take on a more challenging part of the cave, called the Birth Canal. He and Josh split from the group and used a map to locate what they believed was the entrance to this narrow passage. When they arrived at a small, waist-high hole in the cave wall, John, believing it was the correct path, decided to squeeze through. Memories of exploring caves as a child fueled his confidence, but John underestimated the limitations of his adult body. He was now over 6 feet tall and weighed more than 200 pounds. Without hesitation, he went headfirst into the narrow passage. As John pressed deeper into the tunnel, the walls closed tighter around him. His arms became pinned under his body, and he had to exhale fully to slide past an obstacle, a protruding lip of rock. Unfortunately, this move trapped him. When he tried to inhale, his chest expanded and became wedged against the rock. Worse still, the tunnel ahead of him ended abruptly. It was not the birth canal. He was trapped, nearly upside down, in a dead-end tunnel with no room to turn back. John called out to Josh, who tried to help, but also got stuck. Realizing the severity of the situation, Josh managed to free himself and ran to get help. It took 3 hours for the first rescue worker, Susie Mata, to reach the scene. Susie tried to comfort John, but the sight of his position in the cave alarmed her. Rescuing him was going to be extremely difficult. John was nearly vertical, with his head lower than his feet, a dangerous position that causes blood to pool in the brain and makes it difficult for the heart to pump blood effectively. Time was running out. Rescue teams worked tirelessly to free John. They used ropes, pulleys, drills, and chisels to try to widen the passage and pull him out. Despite their best efforts, progress was minimal. John had been stuck for hours, and the trauma physician on site estimated he had only 8 to 10 hours to live due to the strain of being inverted. Rescue workers faced another complication. John's legs needed to bend to navigate the tunnel's twists on the way out. This would require breaking his legs, a move likely to send him into fatal shock. After 27 grueling hours, John became unresponsive. He was declared dead in the early hours of November 25, 2009. His body remains inside Nutty Putty Cave, which was permanently sealed with concrete shortly after the tragedy to prevent further accidents. John left behind his wife, Emily, their 1-year-old daughter, and an unborn child Emily was carrying at the time. Robert Landsburg. Just 52 miles northeast of Portland, Oregon, in the Pacific Northwest region of the United States, lies Mount St. Helens, a striking volcano explored by many for centuries. It holds significant meaning for the Cowlitz and Yakama tribes and stands tall at 8,360 feet. Many people have visited the mountain to capture its beauty in photographs, usually without issue. However, on May 18, 1980, Mount St. Helens erupted with the force of a hydrogen bomb, flattening forests and scorching 100 square miles of timberland. A photo taken by Robert Landsburg, a 48-year-old American photographer, shows a dark cloud rising above a row of trees. Landsburg had come to the mountain to document its splendor, but the ominous cloud in his photo was actually molten ash from the eruption, one of the most infamous natural disasters in U.S. history. The volcano erupted with a force that turned daylight to darkness, killing 57 people, destroying hundreds of homes, and damaging 185 miles of highway. The eruption, triggered by an earthquake, reduced the mountain's peak from 9,677 feet to 8,363 feet. Landsburg, realizing he wouldn't survive, heroically protected his photographic equipment by placing it in his backpack and laying on it to preserve the film for future researchers. Nathan Schwab. On August 7, 2016, 12-year-old Nathan Schwab was standing near a pool at the bottom of the world's tallest water slide. He had just gone down the huge slide and was waiting for his 10-year-old brother, Caleb, to come down next. The two boys had climbed to the top together, but were put into different rafts. Nathan went first, excited and full of energy, while Caleb was just a few moments behind. As Nathan waited, the seconds felt longer and longer. He looked at the end of the slide, expecting to see his brother come out, maybe laughing or out of breath. But what happened next was something no one ever expected. It would change everything. To understand how this happened, we have to go back a few years. The Schlitterbahn Water Park in Kansas City had opened in 2009, but things didn't go well. The park didn't attract enough visitors, and they struggled to stay in business. In 2012, the owners decided they needed something big to draw crowds, so they announced they would build the world's tallest and fastest water slide. They wanted to break a world record and get more people to visit. The park owner came up with the design himself. When he showed it to real ride makers, they said it wasn't safe. But instead of hiring experts, the park decided to build it on their own. They rushed the process. Things that usually take months to plan were done in just a few weeks. In less than a year, the slide was ready for testing. The ride was called Verrückt, which means crazy in German. During early tests, they noticed a big problem. The rafts would sometimes fly into the air at high speeds, especially on the second hill of the slide. This was very dangerous. The team made changes, but they were still rushing. Even before everything was fixed, the slide was given the title of the world's tallest water slide by the Guinness Book of Records in 2014. Veryovkina was 168 feet tall, taller than the Niagara Falls. Even though the ride still had safety issues, the owners pushed to open it. They put a metal net over the ride to try to stop the rafts from flying off. But this wasn't a real fix. It was just a quick way to make things seem safe. Once the ride opened, it became a huge success. People from all over the world came to try it. But even though the ride was popular, it still had the same dangerous problem. Rafts kept going airborne on the same part of the slide. Some riders were hurt and workers warned the management, but nothing was done to fix it. Then came that awful day in August 2016. The park was holding a special event for elected officials and their families. Kansas State Representative Scott Schwab came with his wife and 4 children. Nathan and Caleb were excited to try the rides, especially Veryovkina. They had gone to church that morning, then headed to the park for a fun day. At the top of the ride, the operator weighed the kids and put them into different groups based on their weight. Each raft could hold 3 people. Nathan and Caleb ended up in separate rafts with 2 other people each. Nathan's raft went first. He told Caleb he'd wait at the bottom. Then came Caleb's turn. He was in the front of the raft, sitting with 2 sisters, Hannah and Mira. At first, the ride went fine. The raft shot down the first drop at 70 miles per hour, but when they hit the second hill, things went wrong. The raft flew into the air and hit the metal netting above. Caleb's neck hit a metal pole, and he died instantly. The 2 girls behind him were badly hurt, with broken bones in their faces. Scott and Michelle Schwab ran to the ride after hearing what happened, but people stopped them, saying it was too terrible to see. First responders didn't even try to help Caleb. They knew it was too late. A park worker quietly told the parents that their son had died. The ride was closed right away, and a big investigation started. Experts looked at the ride and quickly saw that the second hill had a serious design flaw. Rafts often went into the air at that spot. The metal netting that was supposed to help actually made things worse. If it hadn't been there, Caleb might have survived. It was also revealed that Kansas had very weak safety rules for water parks. The parks were allowed to inspect their own rides. That meant no outside experts checked the safety of Veryovkina. Between 2014 and 2016, at least 11 people had already reported getting hurt on the ride. Still, the park owners didn't fix the problem. After the investigation, serious charges were brought against the people responsible. The park's co-owner, the main ride designer, and the lead contractor were all charged with second-degree murder. The park manager was charged with hiding past safety problems. What happened to Caleb was a result of rushing, ignoring warnings, and putting profit over safety. Johnston. David Johnston was a highly skilled American volcanologist, admired for his expertise in volcanic gases and their relationship to eruptions. In May 1980, Johnston was stationed at an observation post located 6 miles from Mount St. Helens. The photograph of him was taken just hours before disaster struck. On May 18, 1980, only 13 hours later, the volcano erupted in a massive explosion that claimed 57 lives, including Johnston's. He was engulfed by the deadly blast. Despite extensive search efforts, his body was never recovered. Muhammad Ali Sadpara. In the far north of Pakistan, close to China, there is a narrow path that winds through tall, rocky mountains. This area is part of the Karakoram Range. The path leads to a wide open space surrounded by huge snow-covered peaks. The air is thin, and the sky feels endless. This is the last village before entering a place where no one lives. No roads, no houses, nothing. From here, it takes about 7 hard days of walking to reach K2, the second highest mountain in the world. K2 is very tall and very dangerous. Climbers say it looks like a giant pyramid made of ice and rock. It's often called the Savage Mountain. For many years, 1 in every 4 people who reached the top died before making it back down. Muhammad Ali Sadpara was born on February 2, 1976, in a small village called Sadpara in northern Pakistan. He was the youngest of 11 children. Growing up in the mountains made him strong and used to the cold, thin air. His family was very poor. His father worked a small government job, and there was never much money. After middle school, the family moved to a nearby town so Ali could study more. But they couldn't afford his education for long, so he had to start working. Ali lived near some of the world's tallest mountains. Many tourists and climbers came to the area, and locals helped them by carrying heavy bags and equipment up the mountains. These helpers were called porters. Ali became a porter too. It was a tough job, but he was strong and fast. Even when wearing cheap clothes or flip-flops, he could climb better than most people with the best gear. While others gasped for air, Ali moved quickly and easily. As time passed, Ali became well known. He worked with many international teams, not just carrying bags but giving advice and leading climbs. In 2006, he climbed his first 8,000-meter mountain called Geyser 2. There are 14 mountains in the world that are over 8,000 meters high. They are called the 8,000ers. Over the years, Ali climbed 8 of them, more than any other Pakistani. In 2016, he did something very special. Along with 2 other climbers, he became the first person to climb Nanga Parbat, the 9th highest mountain in the world, during winter. This mountain is called the Killer Mountain because it's so steep and cold. That climb made Ali even more famous. He kept climbing dangerous peaks and doing what others thought was impossible. In 2018, he tried to climb Mount Everest in winter without using extra oxygen. The temperature dropped to minus 60 degrees Celsius, and the winds were very strong. He had to turn back, but his courage amazed everyone. Later that same year, he climbed K2 for the first time. This was a regular climb, but it was still very hard. Then, in January 2021, an international team made history by climbing K2 in winter for the first time. One climber died on the way down. This inspired Ali. He wanted to break records too, by reaching the summit of K2 in winter without using oxygen. In February 2021, he got the chance. An Icelandic climber and a Chilean climber hired him for their K2 winter climb. Ali decided to bring his 20-year-old son, Sajid, along. Sajid was also an experienced climber and had already summited K2 once before. The team started climbing with about 25 to 30 people, but the freezing minus 80 degrees Celsius temperatures and rough weather caused most to turn back. Only Ali, Sajid, and the 2 international climbers kept going. On February 3, 2021, they began the final climb from base camp. After many hours, they reached Camp 2. The next day, they climbed to Camp 3 and rested for a short time. On February 5th at 1 a.m., they began the hardest part, the climb to the top. The weather got worse, and climbing became very slow. By the time they reached 8,200 meters, they were stuck in the bottleneck, the most dangerous part of K2. Here, steep slopes and hanging ice made the climb deadly. Sajid started having trouble. He tried to use an emergency oxygen tank, but the mask was leaking. He couldn't go on. Ali told his son to keep climbing, but Sajid said he was too weak and turned back. He waited for the others at Camp 3, hoping they would return, but they never did. Worried, Sajid climbed back up from Camp 3, looking for any sign of them. He saw nothing. By February 6th, it had been too long. A rescue mission began. Helicopters searched, and climbers helped too, but no one could find the missing 3. After 2 weeks, they were declared dead. 5 months later, on July 26, 2021, another group found 3 bodies 300 meters below the bottleneck. The bodies had signs of frostbite and suffering. Most people believe they made it to the top, but got lost or caught in a storm on the way down. Timothy Treadwell. Timothy Treadwell, famously known as the Grizzly Man, was a passionate bear enthusiast. He loved grizzly bears and dedicated his life to protecting them and filming their behavior. He spent most of his summers in Alaska's Katmai National Park, living among the bears and recording them on video. Starting in the late 1980s, Treadwell would travel to the park each summer. He camped in an area he called the Grizzly Sanctuary, a quiet, green field near Hollow Bay, where the bears were calm and not aggressive. This allowed him to get very close to them and capture detailed footage. Later in the season, he moved to a more dangerous spot called the Grizzly Maze, a forested area near Kaflia Bay. The thick trees there helped him get even closer to the bears without being noticed. Treadwell believed he had a deep connection with the animals, even saying they accepted him as one of their own. However, his behavior caused concern. Park rangers at Katmai warned that he was acting recklessly. He often entered the bear's personal space and ignored safety rules. Treadwell didn't carry bear spray and believed he understood the animals well enough to avoid danger. He truly thought he was safe. Usually Treadwell camped alone, but in October 2003, he made a dangerous decision. He chose to stay one extra week, even though bears become more aggressive in October while preparing for hibernation. He also brought his girlfriend Amy with him, despite warnings from family and friends. The couple camped deep in the Grizzly Maze, near a trail used by the bears. They had no weapons and no bear spray for protection. A week later, the pilot scheduled to pick them up flew to the campsite. He noticed that the tent was still up, but no one came to greet him. Then he saw a large bear pacing near the campsite. When the bear charged at him, the pilot quickly flew away and called the park rangers. When the rangers arrived, they found a horrifying scene. Treadwell and Amy had been killed by the bear. Their remains were scattered around the campsite. But the most disturbing discovery was inside their tent, a video camera. While the video was blank, it had captured 6 minutes of audio from the deadly attack. The recording began with Treadwell stepping out of the tent after hearing a bear outside. Almost immediately, the bear attacked him. Amy, frozen with fear, shouted at him to play dead, but it didn't help. Treadwell pleaded with her to run, but she stayed. After dragging Treadwell away, the bear returned for Amy. Her screams were recorded too, until they suddenly stopped. The audio gave a chilling account of their final moments. Yellowstone's Geyser Basin. The Norris Geyser Basin in Yellowstone National Park is the hottest geyser area in the park. The water here can be hotter than 200 Fahrenheit and is also very acidic. This heat and acid make it a dangerous place. The ground looks colorful and strange because of special bacteria that can survive in the hot water. It almost looks like another planet. The basin is also home to Steamboat Geyser, the tallest active geyser in the world. When it erupts, it shoots boiling water over 300 feet into the air. It is not a safe place to get close to, and definitely not a place to swim. But in June 2016, 23-year-old Colin Nathaniel Scott and his sister Sable visited Yellowstone. Colin had just finished college. They were on a fun, relaxing trip. As they walked along the boardwalks near the geysers, Colin suggested they find a hot spring to soak in. But swimming in these areas is illegal, and there are warning signs everywhere. Still, they left the path and walked 225 feet into a closed-off area. Colin found a small thermal pool and thought it looked calm and safe. Sable filmed him as he walked closer. He knelt down to touch the water, but before his fingers even reached it, he slipped and fell in. The water was boiling and full of acid. It burned his skin instantly. Colin screamed in pain. Sable dropped the camera and tried to help him, but she couldn't get close without falling in too. She was terrified. Her phone had no signal. She ran for help, hoping someone would be nearby, but no one was. So she had to go all the way back to the ranger station. When help finally came, it was too late. Colin's body was badly burned. Only parts of him were still floating. The water had already destroyed much of his body. The water in the pool was 212 Fahrenheit, the boiling point, and a lightning storm slowed the recovery efforts. When rangers came back the next day, the rest of Colin's body had dissolved. Only his wallet, necklace, and flip-flops remained. Tragedy on the Mist Trail. In the eastern part of Yosemite Valley, in California's Yosemite National Park, there are 2 small islands in the Merced River called Happy Isles. This is where the Mist Trail begins. The trail climbs about 1.3 miles uphill, rising 317 feet, and leads to the top of the beautiful Vernal Fall. The waterfall drops straight down into the Merced River below. Even though the hike is short, it is one of the most amazing in the park. Over 1,500 people visit it every day. On the way up, Hikers walk over bridges, through shady forests, and along fast-flowing streams. One of the most famous parts of the trail is a long granite staircase with over 600 steps. Here, the mist from the waterfall sprays on hikers, giving the trail its name, Mist Trail. At the top, there is a calm spot called Emerald Pool, with a smooth, sloped rock nearby, known as the Silver Apron. Water flows down the rock into the pool. It's a peaceful place where people rest and enjoy the view. But near the pool, there are big warning signs and strong metal railings. These tell people to stay away from the water and not go near the edge. In summer, especially in June and July, the river is very full and strong. Powerful undercurrents move below the surface, even if you can't see them. On July 19, 2011, a group of friends went to hike the Mist Trail. Among them were 22-year-old Horms David, his girlfriend Ramina Badal, and their friend Ninos Yakub. They started their hike early. The weather was nice, and everyone was in a good mood. As more hikers arrived, the trail became busy and lively. The group laughed, joked, and took photos as they climbed. By the time they reached the top, they were soaked from the mist but full of energy. Then someone from another group climbed over the railing and stepped into the water, holding a small child. People around shouted at him to come back. Luckily, he did and no one got hurt, but the crowd was very worried. Hormas, Ramina, and Ninos saw it happen. But instead of being scared, they decided to go past the railing too. They walked onto the wet rocks and into the water. The river was fast, the rocks were slippery, but they kept going. They laughed, posed for pictures, and didn't seem worried at all. They got just 25 feet from the edge of the waterfall. People started yelling again, louder than before. They begged them to come back, but the three friends were caught up in the moment. Then, something terrible happened. Ramina lost her footing. She slipped on a slick rock and fell into the water. Hormas jumped in to try and save her, but the current was too strong. He got pulled in too. Ninos ran forward to help them, but he also slipped and fell into the water. The three friends held on to each other and screamed for help, but no one could reach them. In just moments, the river dragged them over the edge, 317 feet down into the rocks below. After the tragedy, park rangers closed the trail and started a search. But the river was too strong and deep. Days went by with no sign of them. The water was filled with huge boulders and moved so fast that it could slam someone into the rocks. 3 weeks later, Horms's body was found under a big boulder down the river. Ramina and Ninos's remains were not found until 4 months later, in November, after the water level dropped. Gernot Reinstadler. In January 1991, Gernot Reinstadler, a 21-year-old Austrian ski racer, was preparing to compete in one of the most famous downhill races in the world, the Lauberhorn race in Wengen, Switzerland. On January 18th, during a qualification run, Gernot sped down the icy course. It was a very difficult and dangerous track. As he neared a section called the S-curve near the finish line, known for being especially tricky, he lost control while skiing at high speed. Gernot crashed into the safety net that was meant to slow down skiers and protect them, but the impact was terrible. His body hit the net so hard that his pelvis was broken in half, and some of his major blood vessels were torn. Medical workers rushed to help him. He was flown by helicopter to the hospital and taken into surgery right away. Doctors tried for hours to save him, but the injuries were too severe, and he had lost too much blood. Gernot sadly died later that evening. The crash shocked the skiing world and led to big changes in ski race safety. New and better safety nets were created after this tragedy to better protect athletes in high-speed crashes. A video of Gernot's crash is available online, and there's a good reason why it's often not shown. Veryovkina Cave. On November 1st, 2020, Sergei Kozev, a 37-year-old man from Sochi, Russia, said goodbye to his wife and 2 children. He told them he was going on a trip to the mountains to enjoy nature. This wasn't unusual. Sergei loved hiking and had been going on long mountain trips for years. His family was used to it. But this time, Sergei had a different plan. Instead of a normal hike, he had set his sights on a dangerous and deep cave called Veryovkina Cave, the deepest known cave in the world. Sergei drove 15 to 20 kilometers from his home, crossing the Sa River into Abkhazia, a region that's part of a long-standing conflict between Georgia and Russia. He continued driving along the coast, heading toward the town of Gagra. From there, he took rough, steep roads through the mountains until he reached the base camp near the cave. At the edge of a high cliff, there's a hole in the ground about 3 meters wide. It may look like just another crack in the earth, but this hole is the entrance to Veryovkina Cave. The cave drops down over 2,200 meters and stretches underground for about 17.5 kilometers. It's dark, cold, and full of danger. Sergei had wanted to explore this cave for almost a year. He was inspired by a group of expert cavers who had tried to reach the bottom but had to turn back due to flooding. Still, Sergei decided he would try to go in alone, without a guide, a team, or even an official permit. He was a good mountain climber, but he didn't have much caving experience. In fact, he had only explored 2 caves before, but he was full of excitement and believed he could do it. Sergei packed his gear, including his phone, where he had saved all the cave maps and notes as screenshots. Wearing camouflage clothing and hiking boots, Sergei tied a rope to a rock and began lowering himself into the deep hole using a climbing device. Inside the cave, others in the past had already set up 6 camps at different depths to rest and prepare before going deeper. The full journey to the bottom usually takes many days. The first part of Sergei's descent went well. He climbed down and crawled through tight tunnels. After some time, he reached Camp 1, about 380 meters down. There, he changed clothes, ate some food, and rested. He also found some supplies left by others and used what he needed. To get to Camp 2, Sergei had to climb back a little and follow the main path again. This part of the trip was easier. At Camp 2, he found even more supplies, cooking gas, some food, a sleeping bag, and even a makeshift toilet. Sergei was tired, so he decided to stay at Camp 2 for a week to rest and plan his next steps. But then something went wrong. His phone died. That meant he lost access to all his maps and notes. This was a big problem. Sergei should have turned back at that point, but he didn't. He chose to keep going deeper, even though things were starting to go badly. He pushed on toward Camp 3, which was just 200 meters away, but the water inside the cave was freezing cold, and the temperature kept dropping. Sergei didn't have a wetsuit, which he should have worn in these conditions. His clothes were soaked, and he started to get dangerously cold. Worse still, Sergei had not brought the right equipment to climb back up. That meant the only way out was to keep going down and hope to find help or supplies at the next camp. After a difficult climb, he reached Camp 3, but it was empty, no food, no dry clothes, and nothing to help him. Fear and panic set in. Sergei knew he was in serious trouble. Still, he didn't give up. He decided to go even deeper toward Camp 4, another 350 meters down. The further he went, the worse the conditions became. The air was so cold it hurt to breathe. Water pooled at his feet and soaked into his skin. His hands were numb, and he could barely hold on to the ropes. He kept going until he passed the 1,100-meter mark. But then, something awful happened. His foot slipped on a rock, and he swung hard into the cave wall. He didn't have the strength to recover. Cold, weak, and stuck, Sergei hung from his rope as hypothermia set in. Weeks went by. His family, not hearing from him, finally reported him missing. A large search began, but no one could find him. Then, in August 2021, almost 10 months later, a group of expert cave explorers from the Perovsky Club explored Veryovkina Cave. Deep inside, 1,100 meters down, they found Sergei's body still hanging from the rope. He was no longer recognizable. They found his SIM card and used it to track down his family. Sadly, the cave was too dangerous to bring his body out in one piece. So, with his family's permission, about 100 people worked together to carefully cut his remains into smaller parts and carry him out.